Hello, everyone. This is Shannon Waller here, and welcome to this episode of the Team Success Podcast. I am really excited to talk with you today about a really important distinction with regard to entrepreneurial teamwork, and that is the difference between status and contribution. Now, it's really interesting. I've had several conversations in the last couple of days with clients at Strategic Coach who've really had some amazing stories, great case studies, as a matter of fact. But when they've hired someone or worked with someone who is much more focused on status versus contribution. So let me talk about why that distinction is important. When someone is focused on status in their organization, what they tend to focus on, to the exclusion of a lot of other things, is what their title is compared to other people. It's also very much relative to what other people are doing, by the way, what their salary is relative to other people, which, given the fact that it's not really appropriate to talk about salaries, leads them into some kind of dangerous territory, to my way of thinking. The other thing they care about is where their office is, how much time do they spend with people who are higher ups. A lot of their time and mental energy and attention is focused on them and where they are in the pecking order, as opposed to actually how they're helping contribute to the success of the company. And that's the problem. It's not to say that sometimes if we feel like we've been working really long and really hard, that we don't want to be acknowledged for our time, for our effort, for our contribution. So I'm not talking about that. But sometimes you need to say, okay, I'm feeling a little hard done by at the moment. I think that's a very human thing to experience. But then you have to think about, okay, where do I go from here? Do I stay focused on my status, which will probably have me feel bad because I'm not where I want to be? Or instead, you get smart, hint, hint, and focus on your value creation. How can I create more value? How can I contribute more? And this, to my mind, is an extraordinarily important entrepreneurial capability. I don't care where you are in the organization. You could be hired last week, or you could have been there for 25 years. But the more you focus on your contribution, the more you focus on value creation, the more you can help eliminate other people's dangers and things that they're worried about, the more that you can help maximize opportunities, the more that you can give people confidence about what already is working. That's how you create value. As Strategic Coach, we call that DOS, dangers, opportunities, and strengths. And when you are able to solve people's problems in that way, that's really the definition of value creation. Because you provide direction, confidence, and capability to people when you're solving those problems for them. So it's really interesting. Going back to my clients, one story, for example, with my really good friend that I've been coaching for years now, she said someone left their company because the work-life balance wasn't quite what he was looking for, and they couldn't see how to rearrange his job. And they hired someone who, frankly, I'd have to give some fairly impolite terms to describe. Just not a nice guy, really focused on who he was, kind of had a swagger, didn't care about other people, put them down, wanted to be the muckety-muck, and he lasted a grand total of a month. And at the firing conversation was, here's your package. And he was like, oh, but everybody likes me so much. And my friend who I was talking to said, oh dear, that lack of self-awareness is part of why he was no longer there. But really, he was not fun to work with. He was very much focused on his position, how he had power and control, and the people underneath him did not. He was not a team player, not collaborative, and not cooperative. And if you think about really great teamwork, it has everything to do with communication, collaboration, and cooperation. So if you're failing at that level, you might need to take a look a little bit in the mirror to see whether or not you're coming from really what's not that effective a place. Now, it's interesting because I have a lot of conversations with people about teamwork all the time. And I think there's a very important distinction between a corporate environment versus an entrepreneurial environment. In a corporate environment, you're kind of trained, you're kind of raised to be focused on those things. If you're not in charge of your career, no one else will be. It's almost like money's a way to keep score. Well, so is your title, so is where your office is, so is who you're working for, so is the level of client. My problem with that is it tends to be a little bit divorced from what you're actually doing and whether or not it's something you're really good at and or passionate about. It tends to be divorced from what we call unique ability. And so people get into this whole focus about climbing the ladder and striving and getting higher, regardless of whether or not it's actually making a contribution or whether or not they have a passion for it and are any good at it. This makes no sense to me. What really is important in an entrepreneurial organization is that you absolutely always focus on creating value. And creating value is far easier when you're doing what you love to do and are best at, your unique ability, than anything else. And the thing that I really find is that if someone lands on your team by accident or unfortunately maybe by design that is status-oriented, it throws an entire spanner in the works. It just mucks up the smooth operation of your system. Because instead of collaboration and cooperation and moving things ahead, basically someone's ego gets in the way. They're focused on them, not the company. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about entrepreneurial companies and entrepreneurial teamwork is because I really think it helps all of us aspire to work for something that's bigger than us. I've had several conversations with people lately asking who I work for, and my answer is, I work for my clients. That's my answer. Do I work for the owners of the company? Well, maybe ostensibly, yes, but really, it's clients. That ultimately is who I care about serving, who I care about creating value for. And if I do that, guess what? Revenue comes into the company, strategic coach grows, I make a bigger contribution, and then I get rewarded for that. So to my mind, it's really key that we all stay focused on that end goal. So if you're an entrepreneur or a team leader, you need to make sure that you create this type of a culture, that you have this conversation about contribution versus status. And if you're a team member, you also want to be sure that you're part of an organization that does in fact reward contribution, because some people can get a little seduced into titles and, that kind of thing. But also that you are focused on value creation. Don't get trapped into feeling bad about your status. If that happens, don't stay stuck there. Look around and say, okay, how can I create more value? Because that ultimately is what you will be rewarded for. The interesting irony in this whole thing is that the more you contribute, the more status you get. Status is the byproduct. It is not the goal. And I think this is a really important thing for people to get their heads wrapped around, because it may not be how people were trained. It may not be thinking that they were raised in their family, in their previous careers, in their previous jobs. And so it's an important distinction to make, is to really focus on contribution. And that is in fact how they're going to get the status that they might enjoy. So you want to be really astute and aware when you're bringing someone onto your team. So if you're in the position of hiring, or if you're on the hiring team that's doing it, or you're part of the interview process, I want you to really tune your listening to how someone talks about their previous position, how they talk about their future goals. Are they focused on value creation? Are they focused on here's how I can make a difference? Here's how I think I can add value to your company? Or are they saying, this is the title I want, where will I be sitting, who will I be reporting to? Those things are important to answer after you've had the contribution conversation. So it's really interesting, because I think we take for granted that people will come from a contribution standpoint. And frankly, not everyone does, as my colleagues and clients have discovered. And so having that awareness of what to listen for. Does a person get you really excited about what impact they're going to make and what difference they're going to make in your company? Or are they really focused on how they can be successful regardless of whether or not the company is? I want you to think of a basketball team. You can have a high scorer and the whole team still loses. A really good coach, Phil Jackson's one of my favorites, author of Sacred Hoops and 11 Rings, coach of the LA Lakers and the Chicago Bulls. One of the things he was brilliant at doing is getting really top performers to not only pay attention to their high score, but actually the entire team's results. So having a high performer on the team doesn't always win you the game. And that's why contribution is far more important than status. You want to be able to have people who are not just focused on their own results, but actually focus on the entire team's results. This matters. This is a really important part of your strategy. And you need to be really cognizant about the people with whom you're working to make sure that that's their focus. And you can direct the conversation. You can create the culture that really celebrates and acknowledges and rewards and has fun with contribution and has that level of conversation versus status. So I hope you're inspired to take this back to your team. I hope this has really expanded your thinking on contribution versus status. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, here's to your team's success.